This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, Empirical Labs, Sound Porter Mastering, and Trace Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through custom Trace Audio cables and the new Empirical Labs pump compressor mixed through Isotope RX, Ozone, Neutron, Nectar, and Plasma, all mixed on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
Something that I've learned even as a programmer as well, or just a composer, I think sometimes you have to go through the process of finding out what it isn't before you find out what it is. I mean, there are times when if I'm doing a pop track for somebody where it's literally, here's the song and it's a piano demo vocal, and they want a cool pop track that sounds like the radio, sometimes you might go through 3 or 4 iterations before you find that one sound that's like, oh man, this is the song.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio.
Someone asked me a while back, do you fear AI will one day replace you as a mastering engineer? Well, it hasn't yet. That's because algorithms don't listen to music or to clients. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. When I master, I experience the music as your fans will, with the honesty of fresh ears. And unlike AI, I master with your intentions in mind, not merely to process the mix and boost the levels. If you want an experienced live engineer to master your music as only a human can, find me at soundporter.com.
Sick of searching for the right cable or wondering how to hook up your studio? Trace Audio has you covered. Based in Nashville but serving studios everywhere, Trace Audio specializes in custom cables, patch bay labels, and wiring solutions for home and pro studios. Try out the free online custom patch bay label designer at traceaudio.com to easily color code, label, and organize your XLR or quarter-inch bays, which are popular with home studios. It's sleek, professional, and simple to use. Then use the code RSR15 for 15% off printing and shipping your custom patch bay labels to take your studio to the next level. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Kris Crunk, which is just, let me begin by saying that's just a cool name. A first-call producer, programmer, and engineer in Nashville, Tennessee. He has 4 Grammy nominations, won 2 Dove Awards for Southern Gospel Producer of the Year in 2021 and 2022, and recently was nominated for a MARC Award from the Production Music Association. In his 20-plus years in Nashville, Kris has played or worked on countless songs for artists like OneRepublic, Rascal Flatts, 5 Seconds of Summer, Tina Campbell, Jason Crabb, Cindy Morgan, and many others. Kris has been a professor of music technology at Union University and is an app developer for the software company Soundflow. He's also on the Avid Beta team for Pro Tools and other plugin companies. Kris is currently focusing on creating a large library of sounds for TV shows, commercials, and movies worldwide. With over 1,500 original compositions in rotation, he is constantly heard on shows like CBS NFL Football, Holey Moley, TMZ, and Real Housewives of New Jersey. His work can be heard on networks such as Discovery, Food Network, Nickelodeon, ABC, CBS, Disney+, MTV, TVLAND, and the BBC. Thank you very much to our mutual friend, Rafael Sepulveda, and Joe Carroll for making our introduction. Please welcome Kris Crunk to Recording Studio Rockstars. Kris, glad to have you here, dude. Are you ready to rock?
Let's rock.
All right, man. So we're joining you Rockstars today, once again, from the podcast studio, which we've been, Kris, trying to name for a while. One of my favorite running names right now is just Podzilla.
Yeah, I like that.
You like that one already?
Yes.
If you come up with any during this interview, feel free to blurt it out. And then Rockstars, if you think of one, drop it in the comments. Kris, tell us a little bit about yourself, man. How did you give us like the brief story of getting started in music? Like when we were doing a tour here, you said you recognize the piano in my front. I guess it's really the dining room. I guess you're a musician truly if your piano is in the dining room.
It's in the dining room, right? Well, yeah, I started in music. I think it was third grade in Birmingham, Alabama, is where I'm from, and they have a boys' choir that's pretty famous in the boys' choir circles. And so I had an aptitude for music and singing, and I was the kid. I was raised in the church, and I was the kid who banged on all the instruments and drove everyone crazy. So I have a special place in my heart for those kids who drive everyone crazy. But I started to that, and then kind of morphed into, my voice changed, and the voice kind of didn't stay off to, it wasn't as good as it was when it changed. And so I kind of pivoted and did the piano thing, and really in drums and bass guitar. And I was just kind of trying to dabble in a little bit of everything. But I played a lot of those different instruments in church, kind of was the guy who did whatever was needed that week. And so I had this harebrained idea that I would go be a classical piano major with 3 years of piano under my belt, and ended up pulling it off. I went to Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee as a piano major, music ed major, because they didn't really have a whole lot of music production programs back in the day. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that was an option. This is 95, 96-ish.
Yeah. Same for me. When I got into this and came down to MTSU, I didn't know. I mean, I went to school for recording. Right. That was sort of my introduction to the fact that it even existed as a career choice.
Yeah, and it just didn't even, it seemed like that thing where they made music was so far out of reach for what I did. But when I was in high school, they had a competition to do like a teen talent kind of thing with the church we were at, and I said, I want to do piano, and my teacher said, you're not good enough, you'll lose. And he was he was correct. And so he said, why don't you do this keyboard programming category? You might like that. And so I had a guy at church teach me how to do the keyboard. It was a Yamaha PS95, I think, if that was a thing, 16 tracks on the board. And I could just do it. I don't know. It's just one of those things where it was just a gift, I think. And I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to make music. I want to make tracks.
So let me back up. So at that point, the making of the track was one of those all in the piano. It's all in the keyboard. Like you could program, you could lay out the whole song and everything. Yeah, I never learned that stuff, but I saw people doing that.
It would be a nightmare today to think about. I think it was it was just one little tiny screen. Like it was like
a scribble strip.
Yeah, a tiny strip, and you're trying to what a nightmare it would be to do that.
It's
today.
Stressing you out. Just exactly.
Just thinking about it, and and I shudder to hear what those things sounded like. But anyway, so all that said, a long story short, got me to college. I won the thing. I ended up winning the competition. Got me to the Lee, which is a pretty well-known music school, and a lot of guys that were at school with me at the time were in town here working.
What's the name of that school?
Lee University. They've had some people go on and win The Voice. They've had some people get very far in American Idol. And so they're kind of been known for their music. And at the time when I went to school, there was a studio in town called Spirit Sound Studios, and had an old yellow Spirit board that had a couple of buttons with tape over it that was like, do not push this or it will blow the whole thing up. Which
is that the Soundcraft Spirit?
Yeah. It was one of those old boards. And so because I was a programmer and could do tracks, they started kind of calling me and said, hey, will you make this track for this custom whatever? And back then, they had like 10 keyboards along the wall, all set up to some sequencing program hooked to ADATs. And it was a nightmare. If the power went out, you were in trouble because all the sounds you picked were gone, and all those things. So anyway. Was
Soundcraft a Nashville company, or did they just have a Nashville presence here?
I'm not sure, honestly. I'm not sure if they were a Nashville-based
Did you know Alex Welty?
I do not know him.
Okay, all right, no. Going on a tangent, Lidge.
But anyway, so I cut my teeth at that place, working on ADATs and just trying to figure it all out. It just everything took forever back then, and ended up graduating with a music ed classical piano degree. I went through it, and I was in a lot of the traveling groups that they had, so I got to play all kinds of music, and which served me well in my career. And
let me ask you something. So I think of the the switch from knowing one instrument to learning them all, as for me, it was an experience in the studio because that was the first time I started collecting all those instruments around myself. But it sounds like for you, it was that experience of playing in the church band because every week you're playing and like you get a chance to like learn.
Yeah, I get a chance. I would take home. I wish, boy, my church had a 1970s Fender jazz bass that I wish I knew what I had back then and could have taken it with me. But I would take that thing home, I'd borrow it, and I would listen to Harry Connick Jr.'s She record at the time or whatever, and just try to pick out the bass parts and just try to learn. And of course, they were having chord charts most of the time. Yeah. So I'm learning how to read chords. I didn't really get into numbers until kind of college.
What about reading music stuff?
Music? Well, the classical piano stuff was all that. I'm not the best sight reader in the world even today.
I'm sure you're a lot better than me.
I was way better. I was much better at that in college. These days, I mean, I can't tell you the last time I had to read notes. I mean, most of what I'm getting is either numbers or chord charts or nothing. Yeah, and you just play,
or a piano roll on the Pro Tools screen or whatever.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, I'm thankful for that background in the boys choir and the classical music, piano. Like I think that it's sort of like you got to learn the rules to break the rules. So I had the rules, and then, it served me well as a foundational thing. But after college, went to Atlanta 2 years, worked in a project studio down there. It was a wonderful time because Pro Tools had just come out. I think we were on Pro Tools 4. And, that was back when a glyph drive cost $9,000 and for like 9 gigs or something. And it was one of those deals where we were just making custom records and I was learning everything from engineering. That's really when I started learning engineering and mixing and just trying to, we had good mics, Neumann mics. And it was right when that switch from ADATs to Pro Tools was happening. Yeah. So I kind of got to be a part of that. And then after a couple of years in Atlanta, I had a connection here with through the college with a guy named Russell Malden. He's an orchestrator in town, and he started as a session drummer and then session background singer. And then he, moved into arranging for vocals and for orchestra. And, he did some background vocal arranging on like Garth Brooks records. And he's worked on some Christian, a lot of the Christian orchestration.
That's fascinating.
Strings.
I've never really talked about background arranging for vocals, but it makes sense. I guess if you're really getting into a deep production, you want an arranger for strings, you want an arranger for
you got to have all that.
Too.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I produce, I'll use different contractors in town, especially like some of the gospel stuff I use where you got to have a choir sound, and they'll go and listen to the song beforehand and they'll have it all figured out. It might not be notes, but they know exactly what they're going to do. And so that's the only way. Honestly, if we did it any other way, it would take forever.
Yeah, that's what I was wanted to ask you as I hear you describe this stuff. And also, so a couple of things, rock stars. We have a playlist of Kris's discography, music that he's and records that he's made in the show notes. So please scroll down at any point and go listen. Big, beautiful sounding records. A lot of Christian albums as well. And as you might expect in that world, there's a real understanding of big production, big sound stage production, music that's intended to be, maybe there's drums, bass, guitars, but there's also maybe a big choir, maybe there's even a string section, and a powerful lead singer, big presentations. And seeing some of your Instagram and stuff like that, which we have links to also, where you're showing off your sessions, it's clear that there's a lot of people involved. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. Yeah. So I'm getting to my question. My question is, have you also seen examples of people in that world trying to do everything themselves? And does that become, do people sort of trip themselves up trying to do everything sometimes?
There are some guys who are, if you have the talent to do it all, then more power to you to do it. I know where I'm weak, and I know, I think I could totally get in there and arrange the background vocals if I wanted to, but why would I do that when I know this person does it every day and their forte is this, and it's going to make the production better with me doing less work. Yeah. And so that's just, collaboration I'm just so big on that. I'm not the best at everything. And for me personally, I would go crazy. I would stress me out, and I'd rather, and there's times, I arrange strings. I love doing that. I do some pop stuff. And, I don't major in that necessarily, but when the opportunity comes, I enjoy doing that. It's just, to me, it's the best thing in music business to arrange strings and then get to hear our amazing string players in town play it
that way. Yeah.
And it's just amazing to hear. But that said, there are times where I just did a project where it was kind of big band brass. And while I know how to do that, I hired Russell that I worked for all those years, and he nailed it and did way better than I would have done. And so, at some point I know where I'm good at, I know what I can do, and I know what, where my limits are. And I'd rather, and even if I can do it, sometimes I just want somebody else to do it just so it's not just the same thing. And I can get a fresh perspective on something, and someone can surprise me with something, which is what I love when that happens.
Yeah. So the other thing I think that's a good reminder about collaborations is when I think about a film shoot, and then you sometimes maybe get to see something like that going down, and you realize, or even a stage production, and you see that many people working on something together, and you realize that there's a level of possibility in production when you really can assemble a great group of people and it's all very dialed in and organized. I mean, do you feel like a lot of the sessions you do, they could only be possible with a group of people to get that much done in a day or a session?
Yeah, totally. Right? Like everybody has to be on their A game. You have to make sure you have everything, like the preparation to those kind of days, you better have your stuff together. You better, I worked with an engineer who's no longer with us, a man named Dave Schober, one of our best in town. We would do big Ocean Way sessions with Orchestra. And, after all these years of him doing it, one day he's like, I don't sleep the night before these sessions. It's hard to sleep. Yeah. And that kind of made me feel good because it was like, oh, well, I have a hard time sleeping before those sessions too. I had a session last year at Ocean Way. It was a Saturday, and it was a big choir for an artist who wanted a big choir on the record. And so she had a lot of connections with churches and colleges. And so we had 90 people show up at Ocean Way that I didn't know. I had no clue if they were good. I had no clue if they were going to have their, know the music. It was very much a pretty scary proposition. It ended up going fabulous. Everyone had everything together, and, the day went off without a hitch. But it was the night before, I'm like, oh man, I hope this goes well.
So that reminds me, I was doing a jazz record with a local artist here, David Rogers, and he had done choir or choral section overdubs for his album over at Vanderbilt, I think it was, or something like that. And then Blair School of Music, and then brought him into the session, and they had recorded and brought him back to me. And, he was like, hey man, there's like people, I can hear, there's shuffling papers and foot shuffles and things like that. Anything we can do about that? And that was the point. And I talk about this sometimes on the podcast when I'm talking about Isotope, but I was amazed that I could go into RX and just start like removing foot squeaks and shuffles and all these sounds. And
no, that thing's a lifesaver.
Is that part of a thing for a big 90-person choir? Do you have stuff like that going on?
They were pretty good about that. One thing I did do is at the end of the day, I said, hey, can I take 15 minutes? And I said, okay, I want everyone to clap in 3, 2, stomp. I got me a nice little sample library for some claps and some stomps and some shouts and some yells. I just got to thinking about it. Even on the day, I thought about, hey, you know what? I'm not going to have this many people in a room. And so I was able to kind of get a little custom library going there. So that was one advantage of having that. Cool. But, again, it was like, what we did on that day is the artist, she was one of my bosses at Union University. So she knew what she was doing in front of a group. And so she was there conducting. We had a keyboard player in the room who was sight reading. So if there was any question in the room, there was a keyboard that had speakers that they could address it right there in the room. And then I had my engineer that day was a man named Kent Hooper, who's one of our best. And so I didn't have to worry about the engineering. I didn't have to worry about the actual session. I could literally be there. And then we had the arranger as well, the vocal arranger there. So I had a great team to where it wasn't all on my shoulders. I was kind of directing traffic. I was sort of standing back, overseeing the whole thing, making sure everyone making sure we were on schedule. We were going to get everything we needed to get done, trying to make sure I had the big picture under control. And I kind of let them worry about the minute by minute details. And when we all worked together, we were communicating the whole time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to, I didn't even write this question down, But it just occurs to me hearing you talk about it, when you're doing these sessions with all these musicians and everything's supposed to be coordinated, so coordinated, communication is one of the biggest and most important tools in there. And, to hear you talk about having the big choir out there and somebody brought out the keyboard to work things out, it's like, duh, in the studio, even just having somebody go out to do background vocals, and the many times you either rush out there with an acoustic in your hand to strum, or send somebody with even a background singer with a keyboard so that they can remember what was that part, and play the notes and then sing on the mic.
Yeah, sometimes some of the session singers will have a little tiny keyboard. I've seen that, or a little keyboard in the room.
Yeah.
Where if there's any question, most of them are arrangers in their own right. Most of our talent in this town, even the string players, orchestra players, I mean, these guys are the best of the best. And so, there's somebody in that room who's going to figure it out. Yeah. And so, just to have little things you kind of don't think about like that, just having those resources there, it makes the day go from stressful to, I don't like stressful studio days. Yeah. I don't mind the stress beforehand. That's where the stress comes, and making sure you have everything ready. But on the actual day, I want to enjoy it. That's why we got into this, because we want to have fun, and music's fun, and it should be fun. And
even if you don't get any sleep the night before.
Right. And like the brass session I had a couple weeks ago or last week, it was a blast. That was one night that I didn't lose any sleep, because everyone involved, the players were the best in town. I know the arranger was going to nail it. I knew the engineer at the studio we went to was going to nail it. And I just walked in and I had the least amount of work anybody. I kind of just enjoyed it all, and I spoke into it, of course, if there was something wrong, or if there was hey, can we add a fall to this line? Or, I still produced it, but it's a lot of fun when you're prepared and that everyone involved is going to do a good. I'm not a micromanager producer. I'm a hire the very best and let them do their job. And then if I need to step in, I will. Yeah. But I sort of my philosophy on that.
Well, so Gaither Vocal Band, there's a bunch of those records in your discography, and Triumphant Quartet, these big arrangements with horns, maybe strings and band stuff. And it's some really top level musicianship and playing. Very tight, powerful stuff.
Yeah, and on those Southern Gospel records, I co-produce with a man named Wayne Hahn, and I really was not in that Southern Gospel genre ever. I wasn't really raised on that side of things. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we connected through just a mutual friend kind of chance meeting, and we ended up really hitting it off. And I do on those records, a lot of times what he'll have me do, not on every song, but on a lot of the songs, I'll produce the track, the music, and then he'll produce the vocals, because the quartet side of things is not my forte. It's not really I just never really learned that side of things. So he handles the vocals on a lot of that, and then I'll handle the track production. But he's also an orchestrator in his own right, and on a lot of those records, he'll do some things, and there's a couple other guys he might sub things out in town to do some of the orchestration. So then it is really just keeping up with the puzzle of, okay, we've got rhythm done, or sometimes I might start it, do some keyboards and programming, and then we'll overdub guitars, and then we might go in the studio and do bass and drums together and get all that in. And then, okay, well, we've got strings next week, and then brass right after that. And then sometimes I'll even take care of the orchestral percussion on a lot of that stuff, and harp and extra bells and whistles. Or even sometimes double we might get a small string section, because the budget on some of these records, they sound like they're super expensive, but the way that the reality of the music industry these days is sometimes our budgets are not as big as you would think they would be for that.
Yeah, pretty
and
much.
So a lot of times what we might have to do is to do a smaller string section, and then we'll use samples with it and fatten it up that way.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of that. I facilitate a lot of that. And so,
can you give some tips on that? So if the rock stars are thinking about wanting to do a big string section on a production, and they know a couple of players or something, how do you do that? What are some smart tips?
Well, if you only know a few players, we would do for the longest time. When I first got to town, we would have a setup where we would have 2 violin players come in and 1 cello player, but he was really good, and he played the viola parts. He could play the viola parts up high in his cello. And so And there's a lot of variations of that in town. There's guys who play, maybe they play violin and viola, and they'll stack it a bunch of times. A lot of what those guys would do is they would bring 2 or 3 fiddles, or I call them fiddles, whatever, violins. They would bring 2 or 3 instruments, and I would even set up the room. I might have 4 seats for 2 players, and they would change every pass. They would change their seat, and they would change their instrument.
So that changes the sound, but it also changes even the thinking, and it probably helps with the communication. Like everybody knows which part you're recording.
Yeah, it helps you know what you're doing, and they're so good at this because they do it a lot that they know how to even they can play a little differently even, and you stack that up. Sometimes we would get even 7 passes of that. And then the cello, same thing. You get 3 or 4 depending on what you need, and then you can. The sample libraries these days for strings are really, really pretty great.
Adam Audio proudly announces the D3V active desktop monitors and H200 dynamic closed-back studio headphones, designed in Berlin for pro-level monitoring in home studios. The D3V features 3.5-inch woofers with ribbon tweeters for studio-quality sound in a compact design ideal for songwriters and producers. The D3V includes USB-C and balanced analog inputs, a headphone output, and DSP room acoustics. The H200 closed-back headphones feature powerful 32-ohm drivers and comfortable ear pads in a durable metal construction, making them perfect for studio or portable use. The included plug-in enhances tonal control and stereo spatialization, so you never have to leave the sweet spot at adamaudio.com. At Isotope, saturation just got a whole lot smarter. Introducing the new Isotope Plasma plugin to supercharge your sound by giving your tracks exactly what they need, precisely when and where they need it. Unlike traditional saturators that apply a static effect, Plasma's groundbreaking flux saturation technology analyzes your sound and applies dynamic processing, adding targeted warmth, depth, and character to bring out the best in your mixes and masters. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the new Plasma or any of the awesome plugins at isotope.com. So quick question, when they're doing that and they're moving from chair to chair, is it like stacking vocals where people can be very particular about what they're getting in the headphones while they play the next part? What have you learned about that? What are some good go-tos?
I'm trying to think.
But what are things we worry about that we don't need to worry about?
Well, if you're, I can't speak on players outside of this town, but if you're working with a high-level session string player who does this for a living, if you have click in their headphones and the tonal center of some kind, they're pretty good. Yeah. Like that click is more what they need more than they want the click. They need to hear that. And a lot of times with them, I'll make sure that I have the 8th note as the click. So if they're playing all these runs that have that subdivision in the click, it helps them stay on point, there. But, and a lot of times we might go into a studio like Treasure Isle here in town and have 4 violins, 1 viola, 1 cello, 1 double bass, and stack that 4 times. And it just depends on the budget. Like to me, if it was up to me on every record, I would fill up Ocean Way with 60 players because it's just glorious. That's everybody's dream. And, as a writer too, it's so important to arrange for what you're going to be, how it's going to be recorded. Because if I'm going to have 2 players stacking a bunch of times and samples, I do not need to write the highest string line I can think of because it's going to sound terrible with 2 violins. Now, if you go to 60 players in Ocean Way, that line's going to sound glorious and it's going to sound amazing. So you have to, you kind of have to know what you're dealing with and think of that as just from the arranging standpoint of how many strings am I going to have? Okay, I don't need to have a ton of DVC because then my stacks are not going to add up very well because every part's going to be different. And so, it's just a lot of little things like that you kind of learn over the years. But, these days we're fortunate enough to where we can actually have a string section. That'd be the smallest probably we would do. But then, like I said, there's a lot of people. I have a friend in Atlanta. He uses a combo over in London, a violin player and cello player, and they do that all the time. And now in some stuff, if you're doing that close mic, vibey string sound, that works. You might not need samples. if you want that close, small sound, which is a cool sound if it's in the right context.
Right, yeah, like a quartet.
Yeah, a quartet kind of thing. And then we might do that too. There's been times when I'll just do a quartet and stack it 4 times and then maybe add samples or maybe not. It might sound great.
Well, it's funny because I've certainly dabbled in strings through my recording career, and it was always totally uninformed and just making it up as I went. And it was fun to do, and I would encourage anybody to try that out. But it's really eye-opening, to hear described the real deal and the level of awareness that goes into it, the level of understanding in the arrangement process and intention. Like you describing this session, it's clearly not writing in the studio. It's like, this is completely thought out and arranged. Now, is the arranging part of a song for stuff like this, is it pretty crucial, stuff like MIDI arranging and really having a full session with MIDI parts and things like that? Or is it done in people's heads still?
Well, no, typically, just depends. I mean, I personally, I guess because I'm my keyboard background, I prefer to orchestrate. And because I do a lot of this, I'm doing a project this week, a couple songs where it's just going to be samples. They're not going to do the real strings. So I've gotten used to writing like an orchestrator, but using the samples. So I'll have my strings, I have a track for violin, violin 2, viola, cello, double bass, right? So when I'm done with my arrangement, I can pretty much export my MIDI and bring it into Finale or Sibelius, and it's probably 85% ready to put on the stand, because it's already there. But many times what I do is a copyist, I'll just send this Pro Tools session to a copyist, and they have a Pro Tools session. They'll get the MIDI, they'll do all the work, and then they show up in the studio with notes on a page.
Wow. And is it, I've heard it said that what Pro Tools would convert into musical staff notation would sometimes be wrong. Like it wouldn't understand how to write things out.
It depends on, you have to really and with the samples, sometimes, they want you to nudge stuff and it's not all, it can get weird. But if I'm doing it, if I'm sending it out to them, I go back, I kind of do a save as, and I do MIDI out session or something. And then I'll go through and make sure every note is where on the grid, exactly how it should be on the page.
Right, exactly. So
the only thing that's going to mess up is like the really big runs. It'll look like it'll open up jumbled, but they can figure that out.
Right. So for example, what's written on the page it's written quantized. That's almost the way to think about it, right?
Yes.
But when it's performed, the humanness of it is what makes it interesting.
It makes it,
but trying to do that in reverse, it's like you need to re-quantize it down to the notes for being written.
Some guys are different. Wayne that I mentioned, he handwrites everything still. He handwrites all his scores. And that's another level of genius that I don't possess.
Yeah.
But, and those guys, a lot of those guys who came up, they even Russell, who I used to work for, he came up where he had to learn part of his college, he was a theory major, and part of that was he had to learn how to write the scores, the handwritten calligraphy of the scores back then, and transposed for each. You have your concert score, and then you have to write each individual part out by hand, transposing it to the instrument. So, so Finale's definitely made life easier because you can play it back. There was no playback for those guys. They just were geniuses, and they heard it in their head. Yeah. Now we can, for those who might not be as much of a genius, we can hear it played back and go, okay, I like that. And that does help with the sessions. I love to have, if I'm arranging it, I have it mocked up, and I'm heard it 1,000 times before I go in that studio. So I know it's exactly what I want. And even then I'll change, there might be a time where we go, hey, you know what, let's add this note, or let's, once you have everything solid, ready to go, then you have the time to change it or have creativity involved in the session. What happens though, if you don't have things right, if there are a lot of wrong notes, or if you're not organized, then you're wasting all that valuable studio time fixing things as opposed to being creative.
Right.
So I try to have everything organized going into the session so that we have time to be creative and make something better. And then you're not just fixing wrong notes, or because that just puts if everything starts getting wrong, everybody's attitude just kind of goes down.
Right. It drains the energy too, right? So you talked about bringing the keyboard out for the big choral ensemble to make sure things could, quote, be worked out, a communication tool. Is some version of that also helpful in a string session, or is that usually more pencil and paper and,
you pretty much
the notes on stuff?
99% of the time that's already done and right.
Yeah.
And you've like I said, there might be a discussion of, and see, our players are so good, they will police themselves. They will raise their hand and say, hey, measure 36, I think that should be a B flat instead of a B in the scale. Like, and so, they help out a lot.
And sometimes the translation messes it up.
Well, that's sometimes you might have a copy mistake. A copyist just might accidentally put especially if you're handwritten going in, they might read it wrong. And so there's little things, and those are pretty obvious when those happen, oh, that's bad.
Right.
We'll fix this real quick. But, and those are the moments where you have to, my little background story, when I first got to town, Russell hired me as a programmer to run his home studio, kind of engineer programmer thing, because he wanted to get into orchestral programming, which I knew nothing about. So I had to just learn that on the fly. And, but he did some pop stuff. And so I was able to still keep my programming chops up and also run his studio in his home and do all that. But one of the things he did right away, he threw me in the deep end, because a lot of times with these schedules, a lot of these arrangers, though, they work their best sort of at the last minute sometimes. And so we would have a string day and like a brass day that night. And maybe the day was strings, the night was brass. Well, he'd be writing brass while I was running the string session. And so he just threw me in there as a 20-year-old kid with these musicians who are all Juilliard, players. And I'm in charge. So it was a baptism by fire. I kind of did the fake it till you make it thing and act like I knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience for me just to get thrown into it and learn how to run those things. It serves me well.
I know you do a lot of Christian records, and I don't know that this is what I'm thinking of is related to that, but I feel like I've heard an expression of being ready for a session. We've talked about leaving room for, the magic in the moment kind of stuff. So like, leave room for like God to enter your session or something like that, right? Is that a thing you think about? And in other words, if you're so prepared for a session, do you still need to, is the next level, how do you leave room for something to be invented in that moment, created in that moment?
Yeah, I think some of that invention, is, just from an orchestration standpoint, is really the experience of the orchestrator. Like you hire somebody really good and they're going to create that magic with their notes on the page. But where the magic happens, and the most fun days to me are like rhythm section days where we get the song. And sometimes it might be, we might have a chart. Sometimes we might just sit around on the piano and here's the song. Everyone writes chart out real quick and we can come up with something. That's, to me, those, like the initial track of the rhythm section is where we can come up with a lot of that magic that the orchestrator can play off of. Like the piano player might do an awesome lick, and then that becomes the string lick.
Right.
And so those days to me are where, and even if we don't have, like I said, sometimes we build these things a little differently where maybe not everybody's in the room at the same time. But like if I'm doing the keys stuff, I want to really work that out and try to come up with something real inventive and try to come up with a neat moment. And then when I'm working with the guitar player, we're not in a rush. We'll take our sweet time and come up with something really fun and magical. Oh, that's really cool. I love that lick. That's great. And then we get in the studio with bass and drums. They're inspired by that. And then they come up with stuff. And so it's really just bringing...
Would you really record the acoustic of the piano first and then overdub the drums and bass? Or?
Sometimes we do. Sometimes I'll program bass and drums and I usually will program the bass and drums and as a scratch kind of demo on a lot of this stuff if we do it that way. Right. Sometimes we'll go in, straight into the studio with everybody, 2 guitar players and, keyboard player and drummer and bass player, and we'll go. And sometimes, these days, especially when it's more of a pop thing or it has a little bit more of that leaning where that's how you would do it anyway, is kind of just start and do some programming and that kind of thing. So, I mean, it really, each song is kind of its own thing.
Right.
But a lot of that stuff we do these days, we're doing a lot of that like that, especially in like the modern worship music that's out there. That's how they do it. They rarely do it all at one time. They have the keyboard guy start and program some loops and do things and kind of build it that way. And so I've seen a lot of this town has kind of adapted to that in some ways too.
Yeah. So when you talk about starting with the band, it reminds me of doing, kind of indie rock, indie rock, whatever, art music, weirdo music in the studio with my band. And again, like when you start with the band, you're starting with a totally blank slate. Like there's
Right,
nothing
right,
but
right.
space. There's silence. You're now creating sound and music. And then as you record that, now there's a lot less room in the song, and there's a lot less well, there might be still a lot of possibility, but it's more rigid. Like, now something's down. If you do a run that's going down when another run was going up, all of a sudden you might have conflict where it might have worked before. So when you're doing this stuff, while the piano riff might inspire the arranger, do you also find that sometimes because I've found this sometimes where there's been overplaying in the tracking, and now it's the wrong kind of space left.
Totally. And you just have to, that's where the producer steps in. And there's a friend of mine who was a young bass player, really good, talented guy. And I've used him on different things. And one of the sessions, the first time he was playing with a drummer in town that's kind of known for being a little intimidating maybe. And so I think he was nervous. And the first take, it was just the busiest bass part I've ever seen. And I walked in there and whispered in his ear, "You've got the gig. You've got the gig. You're already hired. Now just be simple and play the song." I'm partial to simple. Less is more. I'm in that camp for sure. But the session players that we work with in town here who do this every day, it's amazing. I've been in it 20 years and I'm amazed every time. They're just so good at what they do, and they know they know what their job is. They know what space they have. They know how to take that space. And, there are times when you have to say, hey, this thing's not going to have orchestra. Go to town. You guys are the star of this. Or there's times when you say, hey, this is going to be really bigly orchestrated and have a bunch of stuff on it. And then they'll lay back. They know how to do that. And then there's times when, sometimes I'll say, hey, let's go for it. We're really going for it today. Not that they don't go for it every time, but there's times when we go, hey, man, let's really dig in today. And let's just really, this can be special. This is a special song. And they know that when they see a special song, then everyone just gives, everything they have. And then, then it's pretty magical. I mean, it's a pretty amazing, but these guys, our players in town here, our session guys, I mean, they're just so good at what they do. They've done it so long, and it's just pretty amazing every time I go into a rhythm section day, it's just fun because it's like, man, these guys are so good. I need to go home and practice.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question about that. So rhythm section, bass and drums, they're such a crucial element. They're the backbone of songs, recording in the studio for sure. And, when you work with amateur bands and stuff, you on first time recording sessions, you run into classic struggles like, oh, the bass and drums, they didn't realize that they weren't together on the stage, but now in the studio, you hear it under a microscope. And then that gets into all these questions of, okay, what, should the bass and drums, bass and kick drum be playing together? Should they not be playing together? Where are the pushes? Where are the beats? It's probably too wide open of a question, but what are some, if you were going to say to somebody who's getting started and doing this stuff, here's some things to listen for as far as to know when and where the pushes and the accents are in a rhythm section for this song production. Would you say that stuff sort of is often cued by the vocals, cued by the acoustic guitars? Is that too wide open of a question?
A lot of time it's pretty amazing to watch, at least from a session player standpoint, because typically what we'll bring is either a demo. Sometimes they're pretty elaborate. Sometimes you might say, hey, we like this, make it pretty close. And so some of that's already baked in. So like the push, and they're listening down, taking notes. Like the drummer is saying, this is the push, this is the beat, this is the break, this is the diamond, and the diamond just means everyone's holding for the bar.
Note, right? Yeah.
Right. And, the Nashville number system, we all kind of have this everyone kind of has their own little shorthand. Like if you would look at my notes when I'm trying to write out a chart for myself at home, no one could read it. But
Rockstar's, he's scribbling on his left hand with his right hand.
Yeah, it's just scribble. And so, but I know what it means, and I know, how to do that. Yeah. And sometimes,
fortunately, you don't have to read my notes while we're doing this podcast interview because they're scribbles like crazy.
But then sometimes they'll ask me, I'll program. Sometimes as a producer, I might have that figured out, especially because I kind of already have, I'm a drummer and bass player too. So I try to think of some of that ahead of time. But then a lot of the times the guys will just go, hey, let's do this. does this work? And they'll ask me, hey, we want to push this. And they've, most of these guys have played together in the different formations of the rhythm sections over the years that they kind of know each other by now. And I would say starting out though, I mean, honestly, it's just your ears. It sounds good is the rule in my world. And if something doesn't match theoretically or on paper, but it sounds cool as a band. I mean, that's the thing. Even though we do these big productions, like if you said you can do anything you want, I'd probably do a bluegrass record because it's complete opposite of what I do all the time. It's just pure, no electronics, just pure, that, or like a rock band kind of thing. And I do a lot of that kind of music in the sync world that I do. And so we just could have fun and thrash. And so like, if I was working with a new band today, a lot of it would just be on vibe and feel and what feels good. And if maybe it doesn't theoretically match, but if it feels good in the room and everybody's digging it, then we'll go for it. And then there might be times when you go, hey, like my drum teacher said, every time the bass player plays a note, kick the kick drum.
Right.
Sometimes you just got to go back to the basics of what works and keep it simple. If it's getting too complicated, I'm big on just simplifying the part.
I'm always struck by bass on sessions, and especially when you're trying to figure something out one brick at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've described sessions where it's been demoed out, so a lot of things have been thought through before they go in to record. But in home studio settings, a lot of times we're having to wear all the hats at once, so we're thinking through and answering these questions while trying to keep the capturing of the moment happening with the band. And one of the challenges in bass sometimes is like, sometimes just playing a whole note on that bass just really sounds great when the song's done, and that's what it should be. And sometimes that just slows the song down too much, and it needs to be, doing dun, 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 or whatever, And then another part of that question is you mentioned the push. Should we push here? I guess I feel like you learn a little bit about when there's a lot more elements, things need to be more coordinated in music, and because otherwise it's chaotic. And so sometimes you learn like Gustav Mahler or something, let's just double every line and let's just have everybody playing the same thing together. And that can be very powerful. But then there's other times where that can dig you into a hole where you're like, this is boring. It's just like, it needs more counter melody and stuff. So I guess my question where I'm going is, do you also find that sometimes the band, everybody doesn't need to push together? Sometimes it's okay that the drums are pushing maybe with the bass, but the guitars aren't pushing.
The keys aren't. Yeah, as a keyboard player, as a session player, there's times when I've faced that. Maybe I'm working on an overdub or something someone sends me, and I have to make that decision by myself sometimes. And, you just hope you're making the right one. It kind of just goes, I think sometimes as a player, your fingers will tell you what to do sometimes, or like it'll just whatever feels right. Sometimes that can help that solution. Sometimes it's just a feel thing.
Yeah.
And or it's just there are times when we I'm thinking back to a session where we did like 3 takes of a thing. It was this brushless thing, and they had a really cool idea. Hey, everyone was like, hey, they love, let's make this super acoustic, vibey acoustic. And then like 3 takes in, everyone in the room was like, this is not good. Let's start over. And we just scrapped it, and they just went a little bit back to the sticks and made it a vibe. And then it turned into something really cool. But I think that something that I've learned, even as a programmer as well, or just a composer, I think sometimes you have to go through the process of finding out what it isn't before you find out what it is. And that's happened to me. I mean, there are times when if I'm doing a pop track for somebody where it's literally, here's the song and it's a piano demo vocal, and they want a cool pop track that sounds like the radio, sometimes you might go through 3 or 4 iterations before you find that one sound that's like, oh man, this is the song. And then you know it, and then you go. And you have to be willing to suffer. That's a suffering. It is a suffering to go through that process of finding out what it's not. But sometimes that's the best way.
Are you saying sometimes the finding out what it's not is just searching for sounds in the keyboard?
Well, that sounds, or just even the arrangement or the vibe, or like, especially from a programmer standpoint, like what the song is. Like, to me, it's usually a sound will trigger it in me. Like, oh man, this is the sound that is fresh. I haven't heard this before. This is going to be really cool. This is the vibe of the song. or it might be with the band, like that one song. Hey, that's not right. We've gone down that road, and we've gone far down that road, but then it's not right. I'm very one of the things that I find so true as a producer, and it's painful, but I think it's maybe if you put a gun to my head and said, what's the one thing you're going to say about music producing, I would say it's to kill your darlings. Be willing to kill your darlings. Because there's so many times I might, even as a player, I might have done some really cool thing that I love, and it's just my little thing. And then you step back and you hear it with fresh ears and you go, that's not adding anything. It's distracting and it's selfish on my part. And you just kill it. And you have to be willing to be quick to do that. And maybe you go into a session with the rhythm section and you have this great idea that they're going to all be blown away by, you think, and you hear it and you just go, oh, that's not that good. That's not the best idea ever. And okay, guys, let's figure something out. I don't like that. Let's work together. And then everyone jumps in and works together. But boy, that is something that I think I heard that from a movie director or something. And I think about it all the time when I'm doing productions to where, it doesn't mean I won't fight for things if I want them, because there's times when I'll go the other way. If I really believe in something, I'll fight for it. But there's times when some things are just indulgent and they don't serve the song and they don't serve the final product, and you just got to be willing to say, see ya,
Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle, featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects, perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Empirical Labs, creators of the famous Distressor, offer high-performance gear for audio pros. The Fatso adds warmth to digital recordings with harmonic generation, tape emulation, and compression. The Pump, a 500 series compressor, features 8 selectable ratios, precise attack and release controls, saturation, and an attack mod for incredible transient control. The Arouser and Big Freak plugins are also available at empiricallabs.com, where you can use the coupon code RSR10 for 10% off. Follow at Empirical Labs on Instagram, making studio gear that works a little easier, a little better, and a lot longer. Well, I think about the times when you do the saying, the delete, when you hit that delete button. And I would follow that by saying that it's good to have the openness in a session to let things be tried, let things be put down. If it's a full band, you kind of have to just do takes.
Right, of course.
And then you decide, you hit the delete button and choose the one after everybody, had their break. They hit the coffee machine, now they're in for the listen or whatever, right? As opposed to, it can be easy to be too quick to hit the kill button on stuff in the moment. And that can really actually just kill the vibe with people too, right?
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, when you're in the production seat and you're in there listening on the speakers, sometimes you don't have any time to waste. Sometimes you're doing everybody a favor if you just say, let's not go that direction right now before things get done.
Right. Yeah. And I would say most of those killing of the darlings happen probably right before mix for me. Like, okay, we've got everything done. I have all the pieces together. Okay, that pad does not need to be there. We have strings. It doesn't add anything. Like that's sort of what I do. Like my final process before I send something to mix, I'll kind of look at the whole track, all the tracks, and if something's not adding anything, maybe it was a loop that was the very first thing we put down, but now we've got drums in and now we've got percussion and that loop's not doing anything and it is not going to make the mix anyway. I'm not going to put that on the mix engineer, or if I'm mixing it, I'll mute that thing. That's the first thing I'll do. Or if something, I was working on a track this week, I think it was this week or last week, where I had a bunch of guitar overdubs come in. And I had put a piano part and I had put some synth parts on there. And when the guitars came in, I hated my piano and synth. It just didn't need it. It was overkill. And I literally just muted both of them. And I hid the tracks and they were gone forever. And it opened the song up and it was like, oh man, now it breathes. Now it breathes. And, I wasn't so precious with, I played such a great thing. It just, that my very first instinct, and I'm kind of big on that. I think a lot of times that first instinct, I'm big on that. If it hits me wrong, a lot of times I'll trust that.
Well, I think when you're assembling a track too, it's easy to have all these musical parts in there, especially the ones we start with, and we think these are core, and they just by default they stay in as we add more things and add more things.
Right.
And then sometimes we chase the song not sounding good enough by continuing to add more stuff. And really, if we do get smart with the delete button like you described, and we begin to make room and space in it, it might sound, in that moment, it might sound incomplete to us until we start thinking with a mixer's mind again, because we realize, wow, when there's only 3 elements in there, now I have all this room to breathe it into the mix and, inflate it and make it sound a lot more exciting. So sometimes a broken down section on a verse or whatever can sound huge because you don't have a ton of stuff in there.
And that space is so valuable. And like you said, in some of these big productions that I've been a part of, you have a lot going on. And so you really do have to make sure that every little thing is needed. And then there's times when even we'll send it to mix and they'll make choices and I'm fine with it. If it comes back and maybe that, maybe I'm missing some things, but I listen to the overall, like there was a reason that they chose to do that probably. And I trust my mixers. And then I might have a conversation about it, hey, I really like this one thing. Can you put that back? But well, that's gonna, if I do that, I'm going to have to turn the strings down. Well, that's okay. I'd rather this be up in that moment. And so sometimes you have to have those conversations. But you want the mix to feel, you just definitely don't want it to feel overproduced. You know?
Well, then there's that question of, again, leaving room for some magic. There's a question of leaving room for the imagination as a listener too, right?
Sure.
So sometimes people point out that you don't want to put the harmony on because it's maybe better if you leave room to imagine that there was a harmony there on listening. And if you had recorded a triangle part like I did with my band and then got some pushback on it later, I managed to keep it until the final mix, but I was mixing. But my point is, like, sometimes, you put something out there, other people suggest it going away, and you might get it back and you might hear it in your head again. And then you got to ask yourself the question, like, does it really need to be in there? Or am I just now imagining it and maybe that's where it belongs?
I try not to be too emotionally attached to everything. I mean, again, there are times when I might fight for something that I really, truly love, and I can do that. So I do. But a lot of times I try not to be too precious with everything. And because, at the end of the day, I might be too close to it. I might have heard it too many times. And then someone with fresh ears hears it and gives a different perspective. And you go, oh, I would never have done that. But boy, I like that.
Yeah.
And, or even when you're dealing with clients, maybe, you're dealing with an artist and they don't like it, or they don't like something, or do this, change this. At the end of the day, I'm working for them. And, there's a time when you can have some pushback as a producer. We've all heard the Quincy Jones stories and the things, but where he might push back, say, no, I'm the producer. We're keeping this in, Michael. We're doing this. I've heard a story about the strings on one of his songs. He loved it and he kept it in, and he was right, obviously. So there's times when you want to pick your battles, but there are times when, if the artist feels strongly about something and it's not that big of a thing, I'll just mute it, turn it off, and then they're happy. Same with mixing. I'm sure, I've done some of that as well. And, you're working for somebody, and when they give you notes, you do what the notes say, and, you want them happy at the end of the day. So not too precious and not too emotionally attached. If they want it, that's great. We'll do it. I'm here to serve them.
One of the elements that I noticed in some of the gospel productions is sort of a classic modulation to lift the song later on. And it occurred to me to ask, how does modulation in musical arrangement have an effect on mix choices and arrangements, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe you don't have to think about it, but there is certainly a shift in frequency and stuff like that. Is that ever a consideration?
I've never really thought of it like that, but I think that in some ways, when the arrangement does have a lift in a key like that, it might give you less work to do as a mixer because it automatically arrays, emotionally levels, like the emotion level goes up, or the, like it automatically is going to lift musically, energy-wise. It's going to take you somewhere as a listener. So, you might not have to do as many, mix choices to build that energy with the mix. Like it's already going to be there for you. So I could see that. I'm sure, I've really not thought about it from a frequency level, but I'm sure there might be times when you need to adjust automate some things, maybe just to, if all of a sudden, like I could see where, for instance, maybe there's a woofy note on the bass guitar or on a frequency buildup that pops out in that key change that wasn't there before. So you might have to do some, dynamic compression or something to fix those problems when they arise. But I don't think about that a whole lot when building that arrangement. More of what we're thought of as the live performance for the artist to do live, because a lot of these folks are going to do it in churches live. And so you want to make sure.
Right. So if you're arranging something in the studio, you don't want to arrange. It's like me working with an Americana artist and making it too much of a big production band when they got to go out and just play acoustic and sing.
Or the ranges might be like the very first song on the playlist, Terrain de Green. I mean, she's an amazing singer. I mean, just phenomenal. It's just like the most amazing thing to work with a singer like that. But you still have to be mindful. We lowered one of the songs after the initial programming because she got to thinking about it and she's like, I've got to do this every night, on a 4-day tour or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you have to be there's a lot to think about when you do those. To me, that's the most, honestly, and I was working on a sync. We're doing a gospel sync disc. And I was working with the vocal arranger yesterday. We were going through and arranging the songs. And to me, the number one question is what key is going to work for your singers? Because we can have the most amazing production, but if they can't sing it, we've wasted all of our money and time, and we're going to have to use pitch and time to make it not sound as good. And there's been many times where, I've been around where you hear of stories of in the final mix, everyone freaks out and you got to pitch and time the 2 mix for the record. And of course it's not going to sound as good as it should.
Right.
Things have gotten a lot better with that these days, technology wise, but,
pitch and time, that's funny. Yeah. I haven't even mentioned that plugin for a while, but that was the one that was the main thing
back in the day. Yeah. And so, now we can do it in the DAWs and AI and craziness, but yeah.
Do you still, maybe you don't have to, maybe you don't choose the wrong key often and don't have to deal with this, but have you found some pitch changing algorithms still appeal to you more than others, or is it sort of situation dependent?
Some of it's situation. Seems like some things work. I know that Pro Tools just has they've had some more choices with the elastic time that have seemed. Sometimes I'll just kind of choose which one is the polyphonic or the new one. I forget what it's called, and that seems to do better. Sometimes I'll grab pitch and time. Sometimes it sounds better. Just depends. I still have it in the folder there. But a lot of times, like with what I've found too, there's been times when maybe we've programmed a lot of the track, a pop thing, and the guitars are cut, and then they want to lower the pitch. So what I'll do then is I'll open up all my programming and I'll transpose it in the MIDI and reprint it so that sonically it's going to sound good.
Yeah, sounds pure.
And then we can just, if it's a step or two these days, the guitars will sound, they will sound okay. It'll work. It'll sound good if you just pitch it a half step or a step. Any more than that, you still hear weirdness. But if everything else, if like the drums are solid and the all the programmed elements are re-recorded well, usually you can get away with the other. It's not ideal. It's never ideal.
Change, yeah.
It's not what.
Yeah, I agree. I've done tempo changes. I've done pitch changes on stuff, and it's always fun to demonstrate that it's possible, but it's not always as fun to hear the result when you've got a well-trained ear and you really pick up on the subtle differences.
Yeah, even just the tone of the track sometimes, even if sonically it feels okay, it might just feel off.
Mm-hmm.
Something's just not right, you know?
Yeah. And I would say it's similar to tape edits. So when you did tape edits back in the day, you might do a tape edit to the rhythm section or something like that. And then at first you hear it and you hear the tape edit, but the moment you start overdubbing stuff over it, it just sort of disappears. I mean, assuming you put the tape together well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's similar for these kind of tricks within stuff, right? Sometimes if you do tempo change or pitch change, just a few elements and everything that's overdubbed on top sounds correct, like the vocals, then it
right.
then
Yeah,
better.
You just don't want it all to be wrong. If just a short part of it's wrong, then you can get away with it, you know.
Are you sick of searching for the right cable only to realize it doesn't even exist? Or maybe you're asking yourself, how in the world do I hook my studio up? Well, say goodbye to those headaches, because Trace Audio can get you wired up right. Based in Nashville, but serving studios nationwide and around the world, Trace Audio specializes in custom cables, labels, and wiring solutions. From labeling your patch bay to wiring your full studio or large format console, Trace Audio does it all, whether you're a home or pro studio owner. And the real game changer is Trace Audio's custom patch bay label designer. It's a one-stop tool to color code, organize, and design labels for your quarter-inch or XLR patch bays. No more wondering where things are on your patch bay, when instead you can have sleek, professional labels that are easy to read and easy to use. Try the free online patch bay label designer at traceaudio.com and use the code RSR15 to get 15% off your custom labels and take your studio to the next level.
Did you know that one of the most common fears with audio mastering is not knowing if your mix is ready or not? Look, nobody wants to send a mix in for mastering only to realize there's some resonating low end that's going on that wasn't picked up in the mix. That's where I come in. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. As soon as you send a mix for me to listen to, I'm already on your team. Mix feedback and master readiness is a service I offer for free and for good reason. That's because a great mix produces an even greater master. So if I can help you minimize oddities and issues and even provide some advice that will help your mix translate better, then mastering becomes more efficient and effective. And you don't stress about those issues at all. Just go to soundporter.com. There you can find videos, a FAQ, and a pre-mastering checklist on my website that will explain a lot of what you need to know. When you're ready for great feedback, just reach out via my low-friction contact form and send me a mix to hear. Again, you can find me at soundporter.com.
Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Kris Crunk, again, one of the cooler names out there. And we're going to kick it off and talk more about some of the fun tech stuff like Soundflow and things like that, and then also sync licensing. So, Kris, you ready to jam?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, man. Soundflow. I think I met you at the Soundflow booth when we were at NAMM. You've been, well, let me preface this. You just set the scene for us for these big, complex recording sessions. And it makes, and seeing some of your Instagram posts and things like that, it's like, it clicks. Of course you're using Soundflow. You've got stuff that it would take us hours just to set up for. So talk about some of your experience with that. What is it? And how do you use it? And have you sort of created some stuff for it?
Yeah. What is it? It is, well, let me just start here. About when COVID hit, 2020, I had gotten it one of the first waves, I guess it was the end of the summer, so right around that time. And I fortunately didn't have it bad. I wasn't too sick, and I had a couple of weeks of no work on my hands, and I thought there's got to be something to help me be better and faster. And I know that there's macros. I see people with iPads and these things, and there has to be something for what I do. And so I just went on YouTube and started hunting that, and I found a couple of videos of Soundflow, and so I kind of jumped in head first there. And that was back when it was still pretty new on the scene, and you really had to know a lot about coding to even really do a lot of it, which I don't know anything about coding. I know a little bit now more. I've learned a little bit, but my friend Raphael that introduced you, he was on the forum, and I found out he lived 30 minutes from me. So we got to become really good friends, and he helped me a lot. And I just kind of jumped in with 2 feet. I had the time on my hands to do it. And I started really going, oh man, this could really save me time. And one of the ways that it helps me is I have it set up for all my instruments and all my plugins. So for instance, when I set up a string library, let's say I have a string library that I really like for a certain scenario. I've gone into Pro Tools. I've made, basically a template, but I've saved it as a track preset in Pro Tools. And so, you can have as many tracks as you want together as a track preset. It's not just one track. So I might have 20 tracks of string libraries routed to my auxes, to reverb, and I have one button. I save as a track preset. I go into Soundflow. I take a screenshot, maybe the icon, a picture of the plugin or something to make a little icon. And then I'll go in Soundflow, and in 3 seconds, I will have made a button on my little screen that I can push for that sound, and it loads it all in.
Well, now when you say on my screen, so like what screen?
Okay, well, I have a Dell touchscreen in front of me. If you go to my Instagram, you can see some of this setup. I have a Dell touchscreen that I bought the app that makes it work on Mac. So I don't use it like a slate. Everyone walks in and thinks, oh, you must use it like a slate. I really don't do a lot of hands on the touchscreen because I think I would be tired at the end of the day. But I use it every now and then. And so I have...
Set up like a giant iPad. Just
right. At the bottom of my screen, I've made a little strip and that's more for Pro Tools specific buttons like the grid. I might have, different note values, and I push it and it changes my grid. Or I might have, one of the things that I really love, I have a string template. Once I bounce it, I push a button that says strings out. It highlights all my tracks. It relabels them the way I want them. It color codes them. It groups them. It sticks them in a folder, and then it sends it out to Dropbox.
How in the world did you make something like that?
Well, that's what Soundflow does. It has macros upon macros, and now you really don't have to know how to code. Before, you had to kind of get into coding to do all that, and now they've just made it so where you can literally say, this macro, a lot of people they have a store, and most of it's free. And so all these people have already done a lot of the heavy lifting. And so Raphael, he has a package that does a lot of the heavy lifting as far as what that was. And he helped me with that as well. And so,
So you go to the store and you find...
You download it into your little thing.
Like
a
track
package.
Management,
yes, track management or like there's things for the edit window. You can specifically push a button and it'll change how that looks, Or one of the things that I really love, I'll get sessions from a bunch of people all the time. And so I'll open the session and I push one button and it'll import my window configuration. I have 2 screens. And so I just push a button and it'll switch them. And I have that already built in. So the second I open Pro Tools, I'm ready to work.
It arranges your Pro Tools screens for you?
Yeah.
Just mixer and edit window?
Yeah.
What about plugins?
Yeah. Well, you can,
so I've always wanted that. I always get frustrated that when I go to mix another song, it doesn't preload all my,
Yeah, you can have it.
Plugins.
If you can think of it, if it's a repetitive task, with maybe a few exceptions, just because maybe you just can't. If you think about it, there's somebody on that forum. They're very, very helpful. Very, very good community. If you say, hey, I want to do this, chances are in a couple of days, somebody will either have a code written for you or explain, tell you can't do it or say, yeah, you can do it. One of the things that I really love is I'll have a track. Let's say I have snare track. I'll highlight that. I'll select that track, and then I can push a reverb. Maybe Valhalla, my reverb screen comes up and I see all my choices. I'll push the Valhalla reverb. It will not only load the aux with the reverb on it, but it will route it for me.
Right, it'll create an aux send.
Yeah, and those little things, especially for me as a programmer, and
it probably brings up the aux send fader.
You can have it too.
So you got some sound.
You can have it. You can have it. You can literally put it wherever you want.
Yeah,
and it also works with MIDI. So I've made a lot of I had a touch screen, and left I have an iPad that's sort of my central hub that kind of controls the thing. And then I have a couple of Stream Decks that have buttons, and I have this Stream Deck on the right side is more of my mixing plugin type things, and then I have switching for my orchestral programming. So I'll have my iPad will turn to a switcher for all my key switches, and I can just go to town on that. And,
what is a key switch?
A key switch would be like if you're on a string patch, and there's many ways to do this, and I know that certain DAWs make it easier than others. I'm in Pro Tools and I do all my composing in Pro Tools, which I know is an outlier these days. But I do it mainly because 90% of what I get sent to me is probably already in Pro Tools. And I make it work for me. And Soundflow is a huge part of that. Like anything that maybe that I don't get to, I don't know, maybe there's something that's not included in Pro Tools that's in Logic or in one of these other Cubase. But with Soundflow, I've kind of overcome that, and it makes me work really, really fast.
Yeah.
And I'm not exaggerating here. Once I did have an investment. There's a learning curve. You got to put some time into it.
Right.
But now that I've got it kind of set up, it's really easy to add stuff to it. And it no lie, probably saved me 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours a day.
So I've been leaning into it more, but I still feel like I'm at that early beginner stage where I'm like, man, I really got to put in that time. And one of the things that sometimes trips me up when I'm in a moment is trying to understand the sort of folder thinking of the way it thinks about these different elements. Is it fair for me to ask you about that? So you have, like, I've got a Stream Deck. So there's something called a deck, which is like the arrangement of the buttons, right?
Right.
But then within that, you've got macros, which are like functionality of go do this thing.
Right.
And then there's also sort of like a folder hierarchy of like, here's where that stuff lives.
Right, right.
How do you think about any of that stuff? Or do you just sort of like set it up and now it's on your keypads? And
Well, yeah, I try to think of it. I try to have it to be where the least amount of folders I dig into, the better.
Yeah.
So for instance, on my iPad on the left, I have keyboards and I push keys, and on my touchscreen comes every keyboard soft synth, all my pianos, EPs, B3, all of my keyboard, Celeste, I mean, you name it, anything that I could call a keyboard, all of my choices. And those are track presets in Pro Tools that I just push, keyscape, boom, loaded.
Okay, that's cool. Let me say that back to you. So a smart way to think about this is like, you've got buttons to the right and left, and those are sort of like your main master folder buttons. And if you hit one of them, you can now unfold, almost like unfolding a folder of tracks.
Right, exactly.
You can unzip
choose from.
this big choice of buttons on your bigger screen where it's the stuff you want to do. So like, for example, if I hit a button over here and it just said plugins or compressors, I could have another one that's just like, there's all my compressor options.
And you know what? I had it set up like that for the longest time, EQs, compressors, but I've recently changed it and I like it because what I was finding myself doing was not using it. I would still go up and drag the thing and take forever. And I'm stupid. I need to go to the EQ. I need to go to this thing. What I found myself doing is I actually have everything organized by company now. So I have Sound Toys because I know, I need to do Little Ultra Boy, Sound Toys, boom, boom. And I find myself doing it that way, which is odd. I don't know why my brain works that way, but so, I have SSL and I have Turia and I have Sound Toys and I'll have Valhalla and I'll have Slate. And so I have those at the top. And then I do have some plugins, like the bottom is kind of just plugins I use all the time, like Soothe 2 might be on there, or I don't know, a tape, just one of the UA tape machines, or, Q4 or Q5, whatever it is, the EQ, like something that I'm going to use every day. I'll have those kind of easily, just one button, they load, I'm there. But yeah, I've kind of organized it that way. And I found for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I find myself using it a whole lot more. And it makes it just, I don't know, my brain seems to like that organization better. The buttons in front of me, they don't usually go to there's not a lot of going to other windows. Sometimes you have to, like I put a thing in the App Store for free, and it's just called Meter. And basically in Pro Tools, I have it set up to where I basically wrote like 2 4-bar, and then you have the choices, next bar to the end of the song to the selection length. So I have the 3 buttons for that. And so I just went through and did every kind of, tempo, 7, 8, whatever, all of them. And so I push Meter and a little screen comes up. And then if I'm looking at my score, let's say someone sent me a score with a bunch of meter changes, I just go to that number, push the button, it does it. And I'm setting up my grid super quickly that way.
That's super cool. So like it's like prearranging how this song's going to be laid out.
Yeah, how it's going to be laid out.
As far as the meter and tempo. So you could even, sometimes it's even challenging to just start a song because, for those of us who are maybe a little less classically trained,
Mm-hmm.
choosing the right meter and tempo so that the click even sounds good in the drummer's headphones can be tricky.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be great to have buttons that just say like, I think this one's, give me 6/8
Mm-hmm.
subdivisions or whatever. And then also another one, it'd be great to have one that's just, Pro Tools switched a while back where somehow it just got a little more complicated to remove the accent click when drummers
Mm-hmm.
are like, can you get rid of the accent? Just give me tick, 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 tick,
Mm-hmm.
tick, tick, And it'd be not, you could set up a button.
You could
like
easily
that
do
or
that. You
yeah.
could totally do that. You could set it up to where it's preset, where it loads the click and it automatically presets to how you like it. I mean, that's easy to do. I even have some, like when I program harp, which is a pretty nuanced instrument, but I use Spitfire, and they have the three mics, the close, mid, and far. And so I actually have a button in Soundflow that I will print. I like to give them the close and the two far mics separate. I like to give them that. So I'll program it with the close mic on. I push a button in Soundflow, it automatically changes the mics in the plugin, and then I reprint it, and it's done. So it does feel like you're having superpowers a little bit. I laugh. Sometimes I'll still laugh when I use it because it just makes me laugh how cool it is, And so it is like anything you can think of. It's pretty amazing. There's some geniuses involved in the store, and these guys are constantly coming up with mind-blowing things. You can even have it set to where if you have the Philips Hue, the light bulbs in your room, you can have it so they change colors when you put record on. I mean, and you can also, like Andrew Shep's, that bounce factory, which is amazing. And if you have a lot of bounces you do on a daily basis, I highly recommend looking into that. It's worth every penny. And he'll have it set up to where it'll bounce your mixes and it'll text you when it's done. So, I mean, really cool. I even use it on I have a little graphics program. It's called Logoist. It's sort of a mini, Photoshop type thing, but it's just easy to use. And I use Soundflow in that. I've made macros for that to help that process, even making icons for Soundflow. Soundflow helps me make them quicker.
That's funny.
So.
That's funny. iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks or mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, referencing a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma Ozone RX or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Atom Audio is proud to announce the new D3V active desktop monitor system and H200 dynamic closeback studio headphones designed in Berlin and perfect for pro-level monitoring in a home studio setting. The D3V is a fully active desktop monitoring system featuring 3.5-inch woofers and hand-folded ribbon tweeters for studio-quality sound in a compact form in elegant white or black finish. It's perfect for songwriters, producers, podcasters, and mixers with digital input over USB-C or balanced analog inputs, and includes a headphone output and DSP room acoustic switches. The H200 is Atom Audio's new closed-back studio headphone, featuring 40mm peak drivers and memory foam ear pads in a durable metal construction with a detachable main cable for dual-sided connectivity, making the H200s reliable for demanding studio use. With an impedance of just 32 ohms, they will sound great with your studio or laptop and include a plugin for enhanced tonal control and stereo spatialization, so you never have to leave the sweet spot. To see the new D3V monitors and H200 headphones, go to adamaudio.com. Okay, cool. So yeah, I haven't messed with Bounce Factory yet. But I've seen that it's in there. It does some powerful things. There's a counter offset, zero counter offset. I've been using that. That's really handy. It's an additional window that I can open up. And when I'm looking at mix notes and it just says, 1 minute and 30, but they meant 1 minute and 30 from where the song actually started, not from the zero of the Pro Tools session, it'll change that for me and make it really easy for me to find that spot in a song. That can be, for all of us rock stars, if you've had anybody send you mix notes and they're giving you all these times and you're trying to do the math every time, it's a drag.
There's a little hidden gem in Soundflow on the store that's free. It's called Notes app.
Oh yeah.
And what you can do is you can use that, and it'll bounce your mix, and it'll upload it online to a lossless website where they can listen to their mix. And when they give comments on that website page, you can import those comments into your session as markers. So it'll actually, if they say 2:30, turn the drums down, it'll come in as a marker right there.
So wait, how do the notes get in that comment? How do the comments get captured in the first place?
It's on a website that it sends it to, and then you just type. It has the WAV file, and you can just click where the time is, and it'll take a note, and it'll attach to that time in the song, and then you can import those into markers.
Wow.
So it's a little hidden gem in there that I've used a lot, and it's just, and then now that Pro Tools has multiple marker lanes, you can have your mix note marker lane, and it's pretty game changing. Those kind of things are just, man, it just keeps you going back and forth, and you make sure you got the right part. You know exactly where you're doing the tweak. So yeah, another app that I really love is the Color app that Andrew Sheps did. And here's my use case for it. You can actually set up different templates. So I can have a template where maybe my bass guitar is orange and the drums are blue and so forth. And then I might have another mix, like where I've used it is as I do these sync projects and compose these things, I'll use different mix engineers. And I've asked them, hey, how do you like your color coding? And so this one guy has a certain color coding he likes. So I'll put up his name as the template for my Sheps color thing. And then when I'm sending stuff out to him, I use his template. So it comes color coded to him. Then the different guy I use to mix, I change my color settings to what he likes. And that just, when those guys are getting it laid out like that, they love me.
So how do you think about that? So we would select all the drum tracks over on the left column, and then this color scheme on the Stream Deck. One of them might be, I don't know, blue or green or something.
It'll
like
have
that.
it labeled.
It'll say drums on it. You just hit drums and it just changes all the colors. Yeah, that'd be hip. Hip.
And also, even if maybe you have your own setup that you really like, it just keeps you from having to, it makes it just quick. Like I just click drums. I don't think about, the third row green, third row down in Pro Tools, that kind of thing.
Do you have your own settings for colors?
Oh yeah, I do. And they make no sense to anybody but me, I guess. But yeah, I do. I just have them set up that way. Drums are blue because of Neve.
Right.
Yeah. Bass is orange, and percussion loops are brown, and strings are like a bright blue. I don't know. I don't know. I just have it set up.
You just arrived at it.
I just arrived at it. I kind of picked one. I went searching to see if there was when I was teaching at the university there, I went to search and see if there's somebody has to have
a logic or something.
Or somebody has to have something that's like, this is how you do it. And everyone was completely different everywhere I went. So I just said, well, I guess I just need to kind of pick something that works. And I did try to have it at least make sense when I looked on the screen, not to be too ugly as it was going by, But I don't think
because there are some people might not want like day glow colors.
Right. Yeah. I try to, I don't have the super bright ones. I kind of keep it a little muted, but I do use dark mode in Pro Tools. I've loved that feature.
I switched over to dark mode finally, and now I love it.
It's good on my eyes after working all day. So.
Yeah. I think I like it for that reason too. But the Yeah, it's funny, like if you get into Google Docs and doing spreadsheets, then you try and pick colors. It's sort of funny when for me, my experience is I'm like, I'll highlight some things. I'm like, all these colors are terrible. There's only like a few that are any good at all, know?
Right. Yeah, I know.
But it seems like there's some good ones in Pro Tools. For some reason, for me, bass is brown. That one's just the only one I'm certain of.
That's funny.
Well, cool. So let's see. What other things? What other stuff? What have you been thinking about programming in Soundflow, or what next level? Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you about. I could ask that, but you mentioned track markers, and I wanted to circle back to that. If it's fair, talk about some of these new features in track markers that the Rockstars have now, and maybe they don't understand how that works.
Yeah, in Pro Tools, I believe maybe not this last one, but maybe the one before, they added, I think you have 5 marker lanes now at the top that you can just choose from up there. And then each track has their own marker as well. And, in the audio making music world, I mean, I can get stuck in my ways. I mean, I have to watch myself because I'll still say Apple this as a keyboard.
Right. Yeah, I do that all the time.
And everyone looks at me like, what are you talking about? And so, we can all get stuck in our ways. But I think that there are some, a lot of the use cases for those marker lanes and 5 marker tracks, a lot of it's for post, for the film guys, because they're constantly having to label 10,000 tracks. And they might have mixed notes from 15 different people, and it helps them keep that. And that's where I thought, but like if I was collaborating with somebody on a session and maybe I was unsure about something, I might put a track marker and ask a question. Hey, do you like this?
So track marker means we're maybe used to having a marker up on the marker ruler at the top of the session, but now on the bass track, we could have markers right there.
And you can use it for
the track.
Pro Tools has talked about using a use case being like lyrics as well. Maybe you have a lyric marker lane on a track, or maybe they have their chords at the top now. But you can maybe you might have a lane that's just the chorus, verse, all of that, and then you might have. I could see maybe in a session where you're tracking session, you might have a second marker lane for fixes or punches.
Yeah,
that the guy you might get thrown a bunch of. Hey, the drummer still wants this. The guitar player wants this. Well, you can put that marker on the drum track and on the guitar track.
Imagine. So for me, a classic example is the band comes in to listen, and I try to remember or teach my interns to hand each musician a blank sheet of paper on a clipboard and a sharpened pencil for that very first listen, because it's like, and put the big marker counter up on the screen, because that first listen, they're going to hear stuff, and just if you could just write down when you hear something funny. But imagine if instead they had their own marker lane, and it's like all they had to do was just hit a button whenever they heard something funny. A thumbs up and a thumbs down button.
Right. Yeah. So they're really, at NAMM, I got to spend a lot of time talking to like the lead developer of Pro Tools and some of those guys, and they really are. I know that sometimes Pro Tools can get a bad rap, but they really are working hard to keep things moving in the right direction. And I think some of the things that are about to come out, I think people are really going to love, and especially with MIDI. And so, I think there's some really good things that they're doing, and they're going to come up with here in the future that's going to, I think, excite some people and hopefully bring some people, some younger folks along, the ride.
Do you know if we got markers in the clips yet? I can't remember if that exists.
I'm not sure if that,
I think that would be super useful because, for a podcast, for example, the original clip of the interview would be the place to drop a whole bunch of markers. And then, if you edited something later, it'd be great to have those markers shuffle around with the edited version so you can still find stuff in the original audio, And
I think that's their plight is there's so many use cases for Pro Tools that they're trying to please the post guys, the podcast guys, the dialogue, the huge tracking studios, then the little guy at the laptop and the creative guy. And so, and they all everybody's got to be happy. So I don't envy their plight to try to please everybody. But but there's some good things on the horizon, and a really good team of folks that really do care and are on top of what's going on, I think.
So you've had a lot of experience, working with tools like Pro Tools, discovering Soundflow, But I think you're also like involved, in your intro, we talked about you being involved in helping some other companies with plugins and things like that. Talk to us about some of the plugins that you have had some experience with, or just anything you're excited about right now.
Well, I really am excited about Safari pedals.
Oh yeah, those guys are great.
I got to do some presets on their EQ they just came out with, and then have built a really, really got to know him, who's the developer really well at NAMM, and I've been beta testing for them for about half a year now, but man, everything they do is like my first impression was like, well, I love the cool vibe of the look, and some people don't like the look; they think it's cheap, but I like to have fun, and the look is fun.
Yeah, I think it's great.
And it just makes it fun. Every time I pull it up, I laugh. I'm like, I'm getting to make music and have fun with a gorilla face on this pedal, Yeah,
well, we grew up with pinball machines.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's cool.
Machines.
But his stuff, it's not snake oil. It sounds good. Like everything he does, it does one thing or two things really, really well, but it does that thing really well, and no one's really doing it. So I'm really down with what they're doing, just because especially like in this sync world that I'm in, I'm working on every style known to man, and I might have to do a 70s disc, and anything that I can have mojo with or that helps add lo-fi, or I might be doing a lo-fi disc. I've done a couple of those, and anything that I can pull up quick to give me a cool thing that I've never heard before, and they're definitely fitting the bill. Another company that I work with, do beta testing for, is Baby Audio. And I really like what they're doing. Their new Atom synth that they just came out with.
Right. I think there was you got a great Instagram post to that.
And it is so cool. And it has MPE, which is, the new MIDI expression thing. That's a whole nother podcast. And that's the future. That's one thing at NAMM that I've just, some of those keyboards. It's just a way to have a lot more expression with MIDI. And there's this keyboard, Osmosis, I believe it's called, that's my next big hardware purchase. And it has you can go super down with it. The keys go far, and it gives you this really crazy swells and different sounds. And then you can have side to side as vibrato. And then even how you play it, light play, so this MIDI, it just expands MIDI expression. And I believe that they were telling me the Dune soundtrack was all done on that keyboard. And just these crazy, especially with me I do a lot of cinematic trailer type stuff and those kind of soundscapes. And it's just instant cues, just this one sound with all that expression, you can do amazing things. And so, right now, one of the things at NAMM that I was able to talk to and I just got downloaded was Bitwig. It's a DAW.
Yeah, I never really got it. I was excited when Bitwig was coming, and I was like, this is going to be cool. And then I never got a chance to use it. But
I've been playing with it.
Looks cool.
And it supports MPE. So I'm able to use, I don't have the keyboard yet, but I'm able to use the plugins, and I can still draw stuff in and use that expression. So I've been dabbling in it. It's cool. It's like I kind of look at it like an instrument. I don't think it'll ever replace Pro Tools for me, but as far as maybe for the cinematic cues, I probably will start there, use all that it can do. They have a really way you can do sound design in Bitwig with all the different modules and stuff. And
Bitwig's, it's sort of like a spinoff of Ableton Live.
Yeah, it is.
Right?
I think those developers were from Ableton who came over, and it lets you use the workflow. If you're in a loop-based workflow, which I'm not really, that's not how I came up. But you can go back and forth really easily between the two. And so I've downloaded that, and I've been as far as inspiration, it's actually a very inspirational DAW. I could see myself starting my cues there and then probably printing them and taking them over to Pro Tools to mix kind of thing.
Empirical Labs, creators of the iconic Distressor, offer high-performance gear for audio professionals. The Fatso, or Full Analog Tape Simulator and Optimizer, brings the warmth of vintage tape and tube electronics to your digital recordings. Perfect for mixes, masters, or overdubs by adding harmonic generation, high-frequency saturation, tape emulation, and compression. The impressive new Pump, a 500 series classic knee compressor, shares shares its DNA with the analog distressor and arouser plugin. It features 8 selectable compression ratios, precise attack and release controls, saturation, a high-pass filter, and a first-time ever attack mod for added transient control, which is ideal for adding more snap to your snare drum. All Empirical Labs products are hand-assembled and tested right down to the circuit boards in northern New Jersey, USA for durability and performance, designed to last and be easily updated. Go to empiricallabs.com to find the Arouser and Big Freak plugins, where you can use the coupon code RSR10 for 10% off. Remember to follow @Empirical Labs on Instagram, making studio gear that works a little easier, a little better, and a lot longer. Elevate your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your creative vision to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, crafting deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with unique sound design, Complete 15 has got you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound even further. Then, polish off your mixes with the AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11, included in the Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. I think it's good to hear you say that too, because I think sometimes we need to be reminded that it's okay to have all these different tools. I think sometimes we're stuck on thinking we're supposed to choose a tool like a DAW, but really, like, you can think about them like instruments. You can go create in one and then bring it over here to continue working. And maybe we got introduced to that with understanding, well, you know, if you started on your iPhone, well, then of course you're going to bring it into your Pro Tools to continue. But it can be the same thing with, you know, stuff like Bitwig.
Yeah, no, I'm always, I mean, I've downloaded Studio One. I love it. It's really cool. I've worked on it before. I like how you can layer different plugins. Like you can have Omnisphere layer with Contact and make an own new sound. So each thing brings something to the table. I don't get caught up in the whole DAW wars and all that. I think that it's like the phone wars. I mean, whatever works for you is what works for you. Like that's what somebody told me, that the best DAW is what works for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the way to go. That's the way to approach it. It just seems kind of silly to, you know, I as a beta tester, obviously I want Pro Tools I'm excited about, you know, that company, and I like having a say in the process of, hey guys, we would really love this. Right. You know, and that's exciting to me, but you know, I mean, you can get caught up in this stuff. Whatever works, man. If you're making music and it sounds good, then you're winning, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, imagine if we were making music and there weren't a variety of instruments to record.
Right.
It wouldn't make any sense, you know?
It wouldn't make any sense. But yeah,
or
no, I'm
even
always
voices,
open.
You know?
I'm always open to try new things, and I get a little frustrated like anything if I'm slow on it, but you know, you got to go through that pain to learn it, so.
Do you do a lot of drum programming stuff too? Talk about some of the things that are fun for you in drum programming. And I know you were starting to talk about sync stuff. So tell us what's going on in that world.
Yeah.
Is that a world where you need to create a whole lot of music quickly? And what are the tools and methods that allow you to do that?
With the sync world, there are times when I'll do discs by myself. When I say discs,
when you say disc,
it's 10 songs, and they're still in that model. I mean,
it's just like a catch-all.
It's just, well, what happened, you know, the music editors are looking for X. So I want to have a cinematic cue. So you just go on whatever website or wherever you're getting it, whatever library, you know, and you look for that. And that's just the kind of the system that it is. And now I've done discs that are 20. I mean, you can 8. It just depends on whatever. But that's just how we...
So if you're making 70s funk, the thinking is the film editor who needs sound for this thing they're doing, they go to the website, the library, and they type in 70s funk, and you want to make sure that there's 10 tracks
right,
to
at
choose
least,
from,
and then and then we'll do variations of a theme. Like my business partner Dave Cleveland, he's one of the top session guitar players in Nashville and has been for a long, long time. And so we partnered up. Our skill sets really work well together, and especially for the sync stuff, because again, we've done a punk disc. I might play bass and get my pick out and act like I'm 15. We don't want it too pretty, on that disc. And we just go and thrash and have a blast and laugh the whole time because we're getting to make punk music in our 40s. And then the next day might be, we did a smooth jazz disc this summer with Mark Douthit, who's one of our top saxophone players. And so you got to change gears. That might be the next day. And so you got to, write it. We try to write 10 songs and have all the production ready to mix in 3 days. So we're writing 10 songs in one day. And then, and when I say songs, I'm saying, 2.5 minutes is generally where over 2 minutes. So you might have an A section, a B section, and then you double that. And then you add elements to it. But it is, you're not just doing wall-to-wall new stuff, so you kind of get the song down. And we've done it enough to where we kind of know how to do it. And
let me stay on that for a sec. So the 2.5 minutes, thinking about the why. So having the A section, the B section, a little bit of variety, but understanding and a beginning and an end, probably, right?
Sometimes
but understanding that when this gets used, the editor, if they want it to be longer, then they're probably just going to loop.
Yeah, you have to think a lot of breaks, edit points. We always offer, like when you go to a sync like BMG or whatever, each song will have 10, 15 versions. So you'll have a 2.5 minute version full. If we have vocals on it, you'll have a version without the vocals. You'll have a version with maybe just drums. I've had a show use a kick drum from a sync thing that I did. They just used the kick drum. Sometimes they will get the whole stem. The editors will get the whole stems, so they can pick and choose. And then they'll always get a minute, a 30-second, and a 15-second. So when you're writing them, you have to be conscious of this has to work a lot of ways. So you have to be thinking of those edit points, and you have to be conscious of making sure that they can use it.
Is it liberating in the respect of you come to Nashville, you learn to appreciate and love the song, and now all of a sudden you get to let go of the song? Like you don't have to, it doesn't have to have the same full story arc that
it's thrilling.
Well-written hit song
is. It's so fun. I'll get, you'll look at your, I'm an ASCAP, I'm with ASCAP, and you'll look, every time it gets used, they'll put a cue sheet. And so like Real Housewives of New Jersey. Okay, let me go look and see how in the world what did they use? Where did they use it? So I'll go look at the show. Usually you can find them somewhere online, and you kind of can see where about they put it. And you go, oh, they used a synth wave thing that kind of had a disco vibe for an ice skating. For when they were roller skating. And it was a 70s night at the roller skate. So that's where they used it. Or like there will be times when I've had some cinematic, like the disc might be called dark dramatic cinema, or it might be action cue, and they'll stick it in a Spanish novella or whatever, soap opera, in the tense moment when they're fighting, and then there'll be this action cue that in my head I was thinking Jason Bourne, and it gets stuck in the middle of this. So you never know where it's going to end up, and that's the thrill of it, because it's really cool to hear it work in things you didn't intend for it to work in, and it works. It's like, oh wow, these guys know what they're doing. These editors know what they're doing, and so that's been a thrilling part. And there are times when we will get calls for specific things, like, hey, we're getting ready to produce, ABC is going to do a show next year, and they know they're going to need X amount of cues for this. And so that's always fun when you get those calls, because it's got a home and it's going somewhere. I've also done some news right now on WSMV. Right, exactly. A lot of pulses when you do the news. But also we wrote, right now, WSMV, our local NBC station in Nashville, they're running you'll see it, if you watch the news tonight, you'll see This Is Home. It's the very tagline of the song, the music, and they have this real commercial, and that was us. We wrote that. That's awesome. So that's always fun. And that's a whole nother world. Like their demands are so different than a record or an artist. And their notes are very different and they have a very different purpose for it. And so you have to think, even for the cues, you don't necessarily want them to jump out at you and distract you.
Right.
You want them to kind of lay there in a nice way, and so they can lay under the dialogue. Because that's the other thing when you hear them I call it in the wild. When I get to, I might be even watching a show. I've watched a show before and I heard a cue, and that's pretty fun. But, it's under a mountain of dialogue buried. And so but it's serving its purpose.
For 15 years, I owned a famous MCI console that came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made many Grammy-winning records in the 1970s, and it sounded amazing. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to full digital mixing, I decided to team up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. This isn't just another boring plugin. The MBSI captures that same iconic sound that was used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, produced by Bill Simzik, Saturday Night Fever and Stayin' Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, and was loved by legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik, to name just a few. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a high and low-pass filter switch. Features I always wished that the console had. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio, just like me. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound. Go to makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak or distant or lack punch or clarity? Well, I've got a gift to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you're using. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can use the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. I've done enough videos myself on my YouTube channel to understand what it's like to try and pull some music and stick it under something. And then it's remarkable. You start realizing you're like, you want stuff that sets a mood. You want something that doesn't compete with the voice that's trying to talk over it, so you don't want lead instruments a lot of times, things like that. When I was thinking about what you said and joking about the news cue, where do you think that kind of rhythm stuff comes from? Do you think it all stems from a typewriter? Somebody typing out.
It might have started that way. I actually end of last year, I did a news package where it was very much, it's called investigative news, and it was a lot of, you're doing that a big drum, kind of the cliche thing, but it's like that's what they want. And I tried to do some of them that were a little different and try to come up with new things, but you always have the pulse, and you try to think, okay, they're talking over this. I can't be too distracting, and you want to have a theme, and you just kind of, some of it is kind of techno-ish elements in it. Like you have a lot of EDM in that, like some of the kick drum 4 on the floor. And so you're pulling from other things, but you always want to have it to where it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like, oh, this is news, So, whenever I have a disc, one of the hardest discs I had to do was Asia trailers for Asian films. And I'm going, okay. So the assignment I got, and so I wanted it to be authentic, but that's tricky, that's very specific. Yeah. And so I literally spent one weekend, I probably listened to 100 Asian trailers and cues and took a lot of notes and found a lot of those sounds online And I pulled it off, and I'm really proud of it. It turned into a really, really good disc, and it was well received. But that was a little scary when you get that, or like the very first one I ever did, the very first sync, I actually got into this right before COVID started. I was really blessed because during COVID, when everything shut down, I was able to go full 100 miles an hour into the sync stuff.
Right.
But the very first, I had been asking Dave to help me get into this because he had been doing it, and yeah, I'll get you in it because it's hard to get into. You just can't just do it. It's just hard. Have to know a connection with the company or something. And
yeah, because if you make a bunch of stuff, but you can't hand it over to somebody.
You can't hand it over, that it's no way to distribute it, or the editors can't find it, then you're wasting your time.
Right.
And
it's a supply chain.
It's a supply
Got to
chain.
be part of the supply chain.
So there are definitely, I've worked for several companies in town. I'm thankful for that. But he got me in the first disc, and I was at the airport going on a trip somewhere, and he called me, "Hey, we got your first disc." I'm like, "Great, what is it?" And I'm thinking pop, because that's what I do, He's like, "Bollywood." And so I thought he was joking. I really thought he was saying, I thought he was pulling my leg, and it ended up being true, and it ended up doing very, very well for me. I'm on a couple of Netflix shows, and I just called a friend who lived in India. I happen to have a friend who's in the music scene in India, and I said, "Okay, give me the rules. I want this to be authentic." And, he guided me on how to do it right and the rules. So you do have to do your homework. I want it to be authentic. I want it to sound right. I don't want it to be offensive in any way. Even I keep all that in mind. I want these people, these styles mean a lot to a lot of people. So I try to keep it as true as humanly possible.
Yeah. When I was out at NAMM also, I was coming home one night and I went into the 7-Eleven and got something. There was some great music who was working there. I was like, "Dude, what is this music you're listening to?" And he was just like, it's Bollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I find it? And he said, "You just type in Bollywood on YouTube."
Yep.
And I did, and I listened to it on the way back to my hotel, and I was like, "This is great."
Oh, it's fun. It's so much fun to do. I mean, it's really making a pop track with those beats underneath it.
Yeah.
And some of the vocal. There's a lot of great libraries that I've delved into, like sample libraries that you can get a lot of the vocal stuff to, and you can, add those elements, and that really helps it come alive. But, again, these, we just get, like right now I'm in the middle of a gospel disc that needs to be very kind of what a TV producer would think gospel music is. I'm not going to really, it won't sound a lot like what the radio gospel, like the, urban gospel sounds like, but it'll be more traditional. And I've got some people who do that all the time, and I'm using them. I'm not playing keys on it. I'm going to have him play keys on it.
Yeah.
He's great at it. And, try to keep it as authentic as possible. But then I've got a kids pop thing that we're doing more for like Nickelodeon type, Disney Channel type stuff. And then I've got a Christmas disc I'm doing tomorrow. So, all over the map.
Speaking of Kris,
Yeah.
We're actually coming up on the end of the show here, and I got one more question I want to ask you that is one that I love to ask all of our guests on the show, and this one's hypothetical. We get to take the Wayback Studio machine.
Yeah.
You get to go rewind, go back in time, find young Kris, and you can go back and say, "Dude, you got a cool name, by the way. Just wanted you to know that." But you also get to go say, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
I would probably say, be more confident sooner. Be more confident in yourself sooner and in your abilities. And I think when I first came to town, I was so overwhelmed, feeling like I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough, that I hadn't earned it. And in some ways I hadn't earned it. I had to pay my dues like everybody. But even when I listened to stuff I was doing back then, it was good, And so I just think that that's probably what I would tell myself is be confident, you're good at this, and, don't always just live in fear of it all going away.
Right.
Like, oh, I was so scared if I made one mistake, or if I didn't, if I made one failure, that it was going to all crash and burn. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, so. I agree. Rock stars, you would find it hard to believe, but I'll reveal, I think Kris was a little nervous about being on a mic for a podcast, but he's a natural. There's no problem, man. You're great.
Awesome.
Great guest on the show, and we really appreciate you being here. And you have a wonderful insight into the way that all these records are made. So Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you for having me.
Let the rock stars know, where can they find you online? Where should they go check out more of your work? What if they got questions for you? They want to go listen to these records, or they are curious about all these sound libraries and stuff like that.
Yeah. My website is mountclearproductions.com. And you can contact me through that. I get those emails. You can also, I think it's info@mountclearproductions.com. Will send right to my email. And then Instagram, I've made like a lot of friends that I've never met through Instagram, just in the music business, talking back and forth.
Yeah, your Instagram posts are cool. There's
and so
insights into your sessions.
And that is Mount Clear Productions. Mount Clear _ Productions is how that is. And you could probably search my name, Kris Crunk, and I believe it comes up there. And then I think I have the domain name kriscrunk.com, which goes to my website too.
Yeah, and I should have prefaced that by saying, the reason Rockstars I keep saying Kris Crunk's name is cool is because of also how it's spelled. It's like there's a K in the Kris and a C in the Crunk. It's cool, man. Yeah. Anyway, dude, it's great to have you here, man. Thanks so much for coming and hanging with us on the show.
Thanks so much.
All right, man. Thanks for listening, Rockstars. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this show possible. iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, Empirical Labs, Sound Porter Mastering, and Trace Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. At empiricallabs.com, use the code RSR10 for 10% off the Arouser and Big Freak plugins. And finally, use the code RSR15 to get 15% off your custom patch bay labels at traceaudio.com. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes, because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio, and they're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.